absolutely.
Do you think this gets lost in translation a lot with our, specifically our MD soldiers or traditional soldiers because of the 2 days a month where you just are only seeing them for those couple days? And I mean, you'd like to think that people would recognize things during those 2 days, but you know, just in the nature of what those units are doing, so much getting squished into those 2 days, maybe not enough, you know, personal conversations happening where people can even like recognize what's happening those other 20 days in the month.
I think that that is part of it too. I think they, and I say that I think this, and I say it anecdotally because I've been out talking with units, right?
Right.
And the feeling from a lot of the soldiers is they just don't feel connected to other soldiers. You know, the good old days where I used to hear stories where bean maintenance would go out and they would, for AT, they'd have like a truck full of beer basically, and that was their AT, you know, supply. But they would take the time and they would really socialize and get to know each other, and they would build those personal relationships. I think we're missing that now, and a lot of our soldiers were seeing it. Now, did COVID help any with virtual drills? Probably not. We really got people to isolate themselves during that time frame. But I think there is something to going back and gaining that camaraderie. And not all the leaders liked all the soldiers that they were in charge of, right? But they got to know them. And I think that's some of what we're missing, because we are trying to stuff 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag, right? So that interaction is missing. But that's the other reason why I think it's a transformational. We can change the culture, but it's going to have to come from, I think it's going to have to come from the bottom up. We've got to get those E4s and E5s who are currently not interacting with one another to learn to interact with one another, because at some point in time they're going to be our senior leaders, right? So, and maybe this is a problem the Army has run into previously, but the camaraderie that used to occur just isn't as much there anymore. And I've heard that from a lot of soldiers in the units that I've went and talked to, is they just don't feel connected. So, I don't know. And it's a discussion. Like, I'm not judging anybody for what they're saying. I'm interested in what everybody has to say, because how do we fix it, you know? Or am I seeing a problem that isn't even there, you know? But I kind of have to go with the numbers that are being reported and define a little bit of the problem that way as well. So, the 2020, the reason I think that the 2020 numbers for Nebraska are going to go up is the DoD did release its 2020 numbers, and numbers. So in 2018 we were at our peak, and it was quite a bit. It was like 30 for the National Guard. It was like 33 per 100,000. 33 soldiers per 100,000 died by suicide. In 2019, we went down. I think it was like 22, 24, something like that. Well, in 2020, we went back up. Not quite to 2018 numbers, but we're right in between the 2019 and 2018 numbers. So I think COVID is causing a little bit of an increase, and National Guard continues. Actually, active duty for 2020 was higher than the National Guard, but National Guard continues to be higher than the reserves, which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. The reserves and the National Guard almost seem equivalent, but I think the difference being the reserves don't get called for state active duty. They don't get called for those additional missions and those additional stressors. So that would be my little bit of analysis on that one. Okay, so talk about this knowledge, just knowing things makes a difference. So talk to me about what are different risk factors that are in people's lives. You can read them, but I know in the back of the room you can't really see it because it's small font.
The risk factors, anything that might be they consider negative in their life. That'll probably sum it up for everything.
Ish. Do you think having a baby might be a risk factor?
Yes, because it's stressful.
It's stressful, right? Now you're responsible for, especially your firstborn, you're responsible for the upbringing of another human being. You're financially, emotionally, legally responsible for making sure that this little tiny human being becomes a functional member of society, right? That can be a lot of stress. On top of that, you get no sleep, and they're very demanding, and your life just completely changes. Even when you're bringing a second one or a third one in, right? It changes the dynamics of your family. Is getting married stressful? For anybody that's ever planned a wedding? Hells yeah. Those are both positive things, but they are risk factors. They can be risk factors for folks. Do you think everybody that has thoughts of suicide has some mental health issues? Not necessarily. Anybody ever spent more than what they made and became uncomfortable with their level of debt? I have. Right? It happens. Anybody ever failed or gotten a lower grade in a class than what they were comfortable with when they were going to school? Yep. I did. Anybody have access to any lethal means in here? Weapons or medication? Okay. These are all risk factors.
But I think isn't just statistically when someone decides to do it, it's because if something happened and they do it right away, right?
No.
I thought I read something between the time they decide to make that decision
Well,
to the time they do it is like such a short window.
Yes, and we'll talk about that, but that doesn't mean that whatever straw that broke the camel's back was close proximity to that time-wise. It's just, you're right, it is a short duration of time from the point they decide they want to die to when they actually die. So yeah, like if you look at the list of risk factors and the things that we've talked about, it is just the stuff that happens in your life, right? Risk factors can be good and they can be bad. Like, okay, so a relationship ends, you might see that as a positive, and I might see that as a negative, right? Depending on how healthy that relationship is. And depending on your emotional involvement. Retiring, transitions, they can be seen as good, right? Like, hey, but it can also be seen in a negative light too, depending on what you've got going on in your life. You could become overwhelmed. If somebody starts having some warning signs, in addition to their having some risk factors, that should probably raise a red flag, right? So what do you guys think? What are some examples of warning signs?
They give the possessions away.
Giving possessions away.
Going from sad to happy. If they're always negative and then all of a sudden they're happy.
Yeah. Change in moods.
Talking about it.
Talking about it. What about if they stop showering? Yeah. So warning signs are just really any actions or behaviors or a feeling that you get or words that they use that make you think they might be leaning down a road. Maybe not a suicide. Maybe you think they're just going down a really negative path. But they've got some risk factors too. Having that conversation, and I talk about that with the units I go out with is just having that conversation. You can build that connection by instead of just saying, "Hey, Captain Burke, how you doing today?" and she says, "Fine," and we both just walk away, right? There's no connection there. But if I stop and I say, "Hey, Captain Burke, how's your day going?"
Great.
Great. Drill's exciting. Is drill exciting?